Let's go! LSU picks up Sevyn Banks from the transfer portal, and I'm going to need your help in the comment section today, guys and gals. Is he already LSU's best corner? Because this is a room that really needs some depth. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell, all that good stuff. And special shout out to Pressy Collection and PressyCollection.com. He's probably not going to wear number 7 at LSU, but still, anytime you wear a single digit, you better have some pretty daggum good ball skills as a defensive player. And you notice this ball is just rolling on the ground. Sevyn Banks does a good job not letting his knee touch the ground and taking this to the house, baby. You gotta love it. But how is Sevyn Banks as an actual coverage corner? Let's get to it. Let's go. Sevyn Banks playing off coverage here. He has no safety help over the top on this RPO. Trevor Lawrence is reading this safety, and he sees that this safety bites down. So he has all this room to work with to throw this football to number 6, and Banks just eats this alive. Now, once again, 6 wasn't one of Clemson's best receivers, but this is a college football playoff, as big of a stage as you could possibly get, and he just jumps all over this. Very physical red zone corner play right there by Banks. And here we go to end the game here versus Clemson. Obviously, I mean, the game's basically over. They're destroying the Tigers. I don't mind seeing a player dominate Clemson in the Superdome. I just screwed that joke up. But anyway, I hope you guys got that. You see this right here. Banks just never gives up on a play, right? Of course, once again, this is another scenario where the ball just happens to pop right into his hands, but he's always ready to make a play on the football. And that is something that just really stands out to me. Sometimes the ball is just magnetic to you. But for real, that's some pretty good stuff, and he gets a really good return here. Nasty deflection, and he's just sitting there waiting on it. And they didn't call this a pick 6 because his knee hit the ground. That gives me PTSD from that A&M game, but still, just amazing stuff. And here's Sevyn Banks making another play on special teams. Kind of blurry footage, but he was able to get his hand in there and block this punt, and resulted in a big play for Ohio State. So this right here is just some amazing cornerback play, and this time we see Sevyn Banks in the slot right here. Michael Penix, the quarterback here for Indiana, throws up a pretty decent ball, but you see Sevyn Banks turns his head and finds a football, and he never gives up on the play and finally bats the football out of his hands. It's really good stuff, and there was a throw that Trevor Lawrence made to Powell versus Clemson where he didn't turn his head, but you just see the ball skills. It's something that really jumps out. Isn't in there, but he just keeps fighting to make a play on this ball. It's really, really good stuff. Sevyn Banks again, just making plays. Island, I love that, man. Man to man. We're trusting you in this situation to make a big-time play versus a Big Ten rival. Indiana was good a few years ago, and look at that. Just good stuff. Just staying with the guy and just finding a way to make a play. And now here we go. It's Tripp's bunch. And what I'm guessing here is sometimes when you're in this Tripp's bunch, the guy that you're man-to-man coverage against changes. So if one of these receivers goes on a drag this way, Sevyn Banks takes it. Let's just say this receiver goes this way, this defensive back takes it, so on and so on. There's different ways to play this. And what ends up happening here is Banks ends up guarding Indiana's best receiver, Freifogel. And there he is right here in coverage. And on this out route, Banks is able to stay step by step with them and finds a way to get his hand in there to make a play. It's just really good stuff. Here he is versus Michigan State. Another deep pass right here. And we are trusting Sevyn Banks to make a big play right here. And there he is. He's over the top of the receiver, and he almost brings this down for an INT. Boom! I'm looking at you. Yes, you. Just got to make sure you're awake because I need your help trying to figure out if Sevyn Banks is a guy that we can trust in coverage. And the answer to that is Maybe. So this was a back shoulder throw to Cornell Powell early on. I thought this was offensive pass interference, but they never call that. Anyway, for me, you look at Sevyn Banks. In 2019, he was one of the highest graded corners according to Pro Football Focus, and that was his second year as a collegiate player. So for me, that shows that he had a good early breakout age, that he was a pretty dominant, or at the very least very, very good corner early on in his career. The problem, though, is that he did regress some. I don't fault Sevyn Banks on this. This was just a good throw and catch by Trevor Lawrence and a little OPI there at the end. But in 2020, Sevyn Banks was actually, according to Pro Football Focus, one of the worst coverage corners in all of college football. And then, of course, Sevyn Banks in 2021 played very sparingly, and we'll get to that in just a second. But Banks did get beat, and a good example of this, was the Indiana game. You saw him going up against number 13, and he did pretty good on the snaps that you saw, but that's why you got to do some digging. He also got beat deep for a touchdown in that game as well. So in 2019, he was better than what he was in 2020 as a coverage guy. So really, ironically, his trajectory was a lot like Derek Stingley. Dominant 2019 and a very injury-filled and regressed-filled 2020 and 2021. And speaking of Derek Stingley, if you look at some of these NFL draft websites, Sevyn Banks' name was mentioned in the next tier of corners behind Stingley, Gardner, Kaiir Elam, and then, of course, Sevyn Banks. So it's very fascinating to see that regression as a coverage guy, but you also saw the upside with the ball skills and all of that. The second thing I would say is Sevyn Banks as a tackler is decent, but his tackling in this Clemson game wasn't great. Here he is going up against Amari Rodgers, really good football player. Can't get beat to the outside. We need you to, at the very least, force him back inside. And then, of course, this ends up being a pretty nice gain for Clemson. Here we go. Once again, this game is in blowout territory, but here's Sevyn Banks missing another tackle versus Clemson. Very simple play as well. Yes, of course, you want to keep everything in front of you if you're up by 21. We just need you to make this tackle, and I don't know what happened right there. So overall, though, I think Banks is a fine tackler. He's not the most physical, willing tackler in the world, but he's decent. Not his strongest suit. So we'll see how that works out. Now, obviously, the biggest question mark surrounding Sevyn Banks is one that is just screaming at all of us, and it's his health. Sevyn Banks has been very hurt, and this is something that scared a lot of you once the Sevyn Banks rumors started to really pop up, was the hip injury. And a few people have compared it to the Bo Jackson hip injury, and we all know what happened to Bo Jackson as far as him coming back from that. That does scare a lot of you. And let's be honest, it's a part of it. And I think that's a big reason why he decided to not go on ahead and test the waters of the 2022 NFL Draft. His name was shooting up draft boards after what he did in 2019. And more than likely, let's just say Sevyn Banks, even though he didn't play all that much, he only played or registered stats in 4 games this past year. Sure. There still would have been a team that took Sevyn Banks because of his fluidity, his size. He has some pretty long arms and some good ball skills. There would have been a team in the 6th or 7th round that would have taken a shot on him. But of course, that's not what you want to do as a player. You want to shoot your draft stock as high as it possibly can, and that's why he decided to come back. But yes, the hip injury is something that scares a lot of you, and he does have an ACL injury as a part of his career as well, but that was all the way back in high school. So do I feel he is going to be completely healthy going into next year? Hopefully. At this point, it doesn't matter if he is healthy or not. It really doesn't, because LSU had 3 transfer portal slots left, and according to Julie Bodwin of Rivals, LSU only has until May 1st to fill the final 2 slots for them to be able to play next season for LSU. So LSU had 3 slots just floating around anyway, and they are in desperate need for outside cornerback help. So whether or not you think Sevyn Banks is fully healthy, it is totally worth the risk because LSU is kind of in a tough situation right now with their cornerback room. And that is where Sevyn Banks will help out the most, is depth. Remember, this is a guy that's going to be older and closer to his athletic prime than most of the competition he's going to face. This was a guy who faced Devonta Smith in the college football playoff. Kind of a rough game, but he was put in some very rough spots. That championship experience is invaluable. Speaking of championship experience, Clemson cornerback Darian Kendrick also had rough college football playoffs, and guess what? He ended up being the difference maker for Georgia, arguably in their college football playoff run this year. So just because Sevyn Banks got beat a few times in the playoffs by Devonta Smith and Cornell Powell, aka NFL receivers, doesn't mean he's not going to come out and in a potential big game for you, be a difference maker. So for me, it is totally unequivocally worth the risk of trying to see if this guy is the next great corner. And look, Banks knows his injury history. He knows that he has got to put some good film out there for him to get drafted and eventually go get paid. So he is going to be motivated as ever to make an immediate impact for LSU right now. Now, you, wherever you are, could be the absolute biggest believer of Ray Darius Jones, Demarius McGee, potentially Sage Ryan, whoever, Jordan Tolles for the outside corner. You could think the world of those guys. You could think the world of the transfers Mekhi Gardner and Jarek Bernard-Converse. But the bottom line is all of that's great, but outside of really Converse, none of them have Power 5 real big game experience. They just don't. And for me, Banks does, and he has a lot of it. And that just goes a long way for any cornerback room. Yes, LSU is DBU, and we deserve that mantra. But the truth is, this is one of the most unproven defensive back rooms LSU has ever had. And adding Sevyn Banks to that room is a no-brainer for me, is a no-brainer for Robert Steeples and Kerry Cooks and Brian Kelly and the real decision makers of LSU. Banks took a visit to LSU to check everything out. He is all in on, potentially being the next great defensive back at LSU. And this is just something that you got to roll the dice with. And I think I think even if LSU had a deep defensive back room, it's still worth it because this guy has put out some really good tape, and you can never have enough defensive backs. You saw just in this study alone how much of a difference Sevyn Banks can make as a special teamer. So this is just a really good pickup right here by LSU, and I don't see how anyone could see otherwise. But obviously, comment down below. Do you think Sevyn Banks is already the best LSU defensive back in a pretty wide open cornerback room? Let me know in the comment section below. And if you don't believe this was a good move by LSU, also feel free to comment down below. Okay? It is Power Hour LSU Boom. And tonight, we're doing tacos. Let's go.